CQ, N5 MAV. What's happening, guys?
This N5 POB here.
7.3s. This is W5 GFO.
How'd you get a W? Oh, that's right. You told me the whole story.
Yeah, we can talk about it. It's not terribly interesting how I ended up with a W.
Well, that's a trend. We're going to talk about ham radio, so it's not terribly interesting unless you're into ham radio.
Yeah, that's true. We have a way of talking about things that only nerds and geeks are really interested in.
Yeah, this is definitely a nerd and geek field. I came to enjoy it a lot, and a lot of people still do. And I think the last time I talked on the radio was with Bill. Like, we chatted after a net a few months ago. But other than that, digging into retirement still. I've recently found my limits and exceeded them. So
yeah,
I'm doing all the right things. Everything they say to do. You know, I got projects and all that outside of my treatment, and entirely too much exercise in one day. So I've slept most of today just to catch up. But
hey man, perks of being retired.
Yeah,
right there.
Yeah. I saved myself a ton of money. I bought a drain snake years ago, big motorized. You know, I had to fix some plumbing. Thought, man, I saved a lot of money, but holy hell, man, it's hot out there.
Yeah.
Right now. So, yeah.
I saw a meme on social media yesterday that said, everybody's so happy that it's September. You guys are acting like it's not going to be 100 degrees for the next 4 weeks.
Yeah, it's going to be ridiculous. We're waiting on cool enough weather to put the boat in the water. I can't really take heat right now. Yeah. And that might be December. We usually do a Christmas light cruise every once in a while, and we're probably going to be the first time we put it in the water this year.
Well, I have been kind of doing more inside stuff myself. And one of the things that I'm doing right now, and it's funny that you called and said, hey, let's do a podcast on amateur radio, because I finally had my first study session a couple of nights ago to upgrade my license.
All right, cool.
So after several years of not really being active at all, in fact, to the point where I unhooked and stayed off of radio for a long time, have one radio hooked up right now.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing while waiting for the heat to subside, and then go ahead and take a test and you know, something interesting to keep my mind occupied while I'm having to stay indoors more often.
Yeah. Do you have a general or is yours
extra class?
Yeah.
I like I said, I was licensed in October of 1988, and then upgraded. That was as a novice. Upgraded to technician in November. And then general probably in January of 89, and then for a long time didn't do anything, and then in 1993 upgraded to advanced and extra in the same month.
Boy, we had so many classes in ham radio back then. I started out also as a novice in 98, and then from novice I went to technician, and then from technician I went to technician plus, which at that time had a 5-word per minute CW test associated with it. And then I kind of stayed there for a while, and because I was doing amateur radio emergency service and a few things like that. It was mainly UHF and VHF and repeaters, and so I kind of was satisfied with where I was, but I knew I was going to go to general. Well, life kind of took over. I got away from it for a while, and then they changed all the classes, so now there are only 3 classes now. Yep. And so I kept thinking, well, they're going to...
No code, too.
No code,
right.
yeah. Code is gone. Morse code is completely gone.
But I had to pass 20 words a minute.
Yeah, for extra.
In fact, I had gotten to the point I could do send and receive at about 25. Mm-hmm. And I let that skill go. I could get it back if I practiced for 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But it's a skill.
I got in 2010. It was no code then. And we got some sort of license for Civil Air Patrol. I got in the 80s time. I forget what it is. It's the same one we had to get for a pilot's license. Mm-hmm. You had to get an FCC ticket of some kind to operate those. Well, CAP had a VHF frequency, its own, and then you
remember
have aviation.
that.
Yeah, so they were all like that. And so what we're talking about is the license classes, and essentially, like I said, there's 3. It's sort of a low, medium, and high. And the higher your class, the more
privileges.
The more privileges, the more frequencies you can use. And when you look at amateur radio, it's pretty simple. It's 2 dudes talking to each other on radios, various frequencies, by either voice, just like talking to them on a telephone or, regular, like a police radio.
In fact, in ham radio, we call that phone.
Yeah, phone. And then CW, continuous wave, which is Morse code. And you can do it by hand. You can do that by computer, too.
Mm-hmm.
So you got phone, CW, and now you have digital modes. I say now. Digital's been around a long time.
It was RTTY for a long time. It was just, radio teletype and all that stuff.
And packet networks and stuff.
Right.
And so the whole thing about it, in that simplicity, now we can turn around and make it really complicated and all the different things that people do.
And now they're using the internet in conjunction with it. And
so that fascinates me because the digital modes, for anybody that's listening, if you could imagine, you've heard faxes and modems. You've heard the two devices communicate by beeps. Well, it's transmitting that, like it would any other signal, so you can actually hear it. You can hear the tones and all if you tune in and listen to it. And then if you hook it up to a computer, you can decode it and actually talk to each other. And some modes are just texting. I mean, that's the best way to put it. It's just like two guys texting across, different sides of the planet.
Exactly.
And then they have some that what's the character limit? It's like 13 characters, so you can get just minimal information across to be able to log it as a contact.
It's like ham radio Twitter.
It is. It is very much like that, except you can't. You can give your call sign, your grid, which tells them where you are, and give a signal report, which that's all it's required to log a contact, and that's all that goes on. Not, hey, how you doing? It's raining in Czechoslovakia. None of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, and we started this conversation earlier. There's kind of a debate on whether these newer modes are good or bad, but really all I mess with is I do a little bit of phone, a little bit of local VHF, so it's just short range stuff, short but very very solid signals locally, and I do some 20 meter. I haven't done code in a while. I'm working on that again, and I do some digital. I do some phone and some digital.
Sometimes it's neat at night to get on 20, just about gray line time when it's getting dark, when the band goes long and you can talk to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
You got about a 30-minute window in there.
Yeah.
I've talked to Italy on more than one occasion.
Yeah. I remember the first time I talked to someone overseas on a radio in the 90s before the internet was anything. And
that was so cool.
It was so cool. Yeah. And in a way, the internet has killed that, because how's everybody going to watch this podcast or listen to this podcast?
Exactly.
I mean, we're so connected worldwide. I can talk to anybody I want anywhere in the world through the internet. And so ham radio kind of lost its magic when you're talking about using propagation and skip and all that to talk to places across the world. I still love it anytime I do it.
But how fascinating is it along the lines of what you're saying? Why is it still cool? It's because I'm talking to somebody else on nothing but a bunch of junk sitting on my desk that I put together.
A 20-watt radio sitting on my desk in my garage. Yeah.
And there's nothing between us. There's no internet connection or anything else.
Right.
But everything else now in ham radio is internet. They confirm QSOs like Bill brought some of his cards, that ham radio operators trade back and forth when you.
And I have the distinction of having two call signs.
That's right. You used to have that's the repeater at the airport, right?
Yeah, I still have that call. I can use it if I want to, but I'm the trustee for the Commemorative Air Force Amateur Radio Club.
Okay.
And that's the repeater call sign, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
and it's out at the airport on top of the water tower.
So that's kind of my 2 cents on it. The problem with phone is, like, you hear one of my favorite things to listen to is just the old guys yammer back and forth, And if you're gonna call, like I had lunch with this guy today, this buddy of mine, his grandfather's big ham radio guy, and we thought it'd be cool. His grandfather was in Scottsdale, I think, and he goes, "Man, you ought to talk to my grandfather." And so I found out where they hang out, some buddies of his that have a net. And it's typical, morning time or afternoon, bunch of old guys getting together talking about their latest medical problems, you know. So.
and their trips to Walmart.
Yeah. And so I thought I'll jump in on this, and I'm running 100 watts, and we could barely get through each other. Just the conditions weren't great.
Right.
So if you're going to be those guys, and you're going to talk to your old buddies, your old workmates, or whatever after you retire, you need that 1500 watt monster station to talk. And so
all I've ever operated was 100 watts. So
yeah, that's the hottest I've done.
And it gets through. The secret's to have I'm always told a $5 radio and $1 million antenna system.
Yeah.
So
that's exactly right. Yeah,
better the antenna, the better you'll get out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you got the right antenna and it's hooked up right and tuned correctly, you can really reach out and touch them with just a little bit of power.
And that's where the geek part comes in. Is I've made antennas and tweaked and tuned. I love doing that.
I finally bought the hex beam.
Yeah,
and that's the end all for ham radio for the HF bands, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
And I like it because it listens on all sides. You don't have to be pointed right at somebody. You can be pointed away and still hear them enough to know you got to turn.
How high up do you have that?
I'm at 66 feet, but it works perfectly well at 30.
Okay.
In fact, before we put it up, I had it on the ground and talking to people. So it works good.
That's awesome. Well, that's my thing is that I've got some challenges with height, and about 25 feet
would be just fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
I may consider that because, as I said, I'm in the process of digging everything back out. I've got an old Kenwood HF rig, and I'm looking for it. I know where it is. It's in the bottom of one of the boxes I'm digging through right now, but I found everything for it.
Yeah.
The antenna tuner and everything like that. So I was considering, I had ended up selling and giving away all of I had a 40 meter dipole and a couple of other things for HF antenna wise, and I ended up getting rid of all of them, gave some of it away, sold some of it. So now I'm actually looking for what's my best option for HF. So
for the bands above 20, above, hex beam is great.
Okay.
And then wire antennas below 40 and 80.
40
Yeah.
and 80.
I use a Wyndham, which
That's
is
what
offset center fed dipole.
Okay.
That's what I use, 2040 OCF, and I've even tuned it off to some other stuff. I can't remember what, but
I lengthened mine, and I can get on 160.
Really?
But not very long. I mean, it's in the high part of the band. But it will tune there only on my big Kenwood. The Flex I'm using will not. And incidentally, you're talking about 20 meters. I talked to the set in Universal City, California, the set of Last Man Standing the other day.
Oh, cool.
KA6 LMS.
That's one of the fun things about the hobby. I like to catch special event weekends. My favorite one is Ships on the Air. And they take museum ships and some working ships. I was actually in Galveston aboard the Alyssa when they did the Ships on the Air, the tall ship. And then every submarine that's in every park. I talked to the Batfish one time. It's this old, it's like a World War II sub. They got dragged up to Oklahoma.
Yeah.
She's in
I've heard of that.
Like a municipal park. And I did a Morse code conversation with the Queen Mary, and I have a big card.
Very cool.
I'm going to put that picture here, the card I got with the Queen Mary. So you never know what you're going to run into, and they'll run several modes. It's sad to hear that there was no phone at field days. This last one you were telling me,
last field day,
it was all digital.
No
but at the
phone
same
all.
time, I understand it because it always works. I get it, but
Yeah.
But
well, at field day, we always have a lack of operators. We can set up all the stations we can put up, but people don't come out to help.
Mm-hmm.
It's useless.
yeah, and that's the thing. I dig clubs, and I support the club. I've been a member. I don't know if I am now. I don't know if it's expired or not. But it's something I do by myself back in my goofy little shack, and I don't really get out much with other people. But I talk to other people regularly, and there are some guys with these monster stations in Europe that are a blast to listen to because everybody wants to talk to them, and they get pile-ups.
Mm-hmm.
They call them, you hear that guy on the air, and everybody wants to talk to him so fast that they jam up.
Well, it's even funner to run a special event. Do one yourself.
Never done it.
I ran one for I think it was the 20-year It's either 15 or 20 year baby Jessica anniversary. So
cool.
Oh.
we ran one, used my call, and printed up special certificates. And we had, when you're on the receiving end of a pileup, it's a lot different than being in the pileup.
Yeah, just trying to get through. Yeah.
Now next weekend at the air show, if you want to come out, we're having a special event there, running W5CAF call from the hangar. We'll have an antenna
cool.
outside.
Oh, okay.
If you want to come out and work the pileup.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
There's another interesting. I listen to that Maritime Net sometimes, and there's a lot of drama going on with those guys. But every once in a while, you hear from some offshore cruisers, big sailboats. They're out different places around the world.
Do you remember the first was the Kon-Tiki, but the RA expeditions in '68 and '70?
Oh yeah.
My dad tracked him and talked to him all the way across the ocean.
Oh, that's cool. You can talk to the International Space Station. They have a ham on board. And speaking of which, one of the things you can do we hadn't really talked about is work satellites, which I've never done it. I've listened, but it's actually a fairly cheap way to do it. But you can bounce your signal. The satellite repeats it.
Yeah.
And talk to people in different places.
Well, my son was a year old. I'd left my packet station up, and I tuned the VHF for the frequency of the space shuttle. This is in 1991. I came home from work, and my wife said, my son been back there messing with something. I don't know what he did. So I brought up the computer, which was a monitor thing with just a very little buffer. So I went back through the buffer, and he had contacted W2MIR, the Mir space station, made contact from my keyboard, and while I was at work.
That is cool.
And I tried for days and years to never talk to the shuttle or the space station or any of it.
Wow.
That's pretty crazy. Yeah, I think Jim Reynolds used to do satellites a lot and have the tripod set up, and it comes over. And another thing that fascinates me, I think it'd be fun to build, is the EME, the Earth, Moon, Earth.
Oh yeah, it's the moon bounce.
Yeah, they're actually bouncing a hot signal. They bounce it off the moon and talk to people.
Yeah,
Well,
bounce it to the moon, off the moon, and back to Earth at another location. Yeah.
There used to be a guy over on golf course down here about Whitney. Had a EME set up. Every time the wind would blow, it'd destroy it. It was huge.
Yeah, they're big. They look like AAA batteries.
He had 2-meter quads hooked in a quad situation, and it's like 16 of them antennas. It was wild. But he did the EME. He moved down to Houston and put the whole thing up on a car chassis so he can rotate it.
Wow.
Yeah, there's some.
So I've never done that, and obviously I've never built a rig to do that, but I've always heard that EME requires a lot of carrier power, and when the signal gets back to Earth, it's extremely weak.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. I've never done it.
Those guys, a lot of those same guys do the 2-meter contests, and they go way out the middle of nowhere and park on as high as they can, or they climb a mountain, and they have these just monster, what is it, 200 watts, something like that, that they just range use on.
Well, I've been on Guadalupe Peak with 1 watt talk to El Paso direct.
Yeah.
I was on Bush Mountain, and I forget, I think it was, I know I talked to Carlsbad. There was a net going on, and it was on about 1 watt. And you guys remember the Miracle Whip antennas? Have you seen those? It's a big, like, extending antenna, like the
telescoping
like the
antenna?
old, telescoping
like an old
antenna,
walkie-talkie
like an old TV antenna.
Yeah.
It's one of those, and it has a little tuner at the bottom, and it hooks right into the radio.
Oh yeah.
And they're crap, but they're great for 2-meter. And I brought one of those, and I threw some paracord up on a branch and raised it up a little bit and talked to it.
I've got a telescoping 2-meter antenna for one of my HTs, handheld. For those of you who don't know what HT means, we got to watch the acronyms, boys.
Handy talkie.
Exactly, handy talkie. Yeah, and but it doesn't have any kind of a tuner or an attenuator or anything like that on it. It's just literally a telescoping 2-meter antenna.
This is better for listening, but it'll get you there if you're.
Okay.
It was kind of intended for I should have brought it out, the Yaesu FT817, which is a tiny little 5-watt HF radio. It's fantastic. One of the things that people get into, they call it QRP, which is low power, and they're small rigs, and they take them hiking, camping, and stuff like that. And of the many things that you can do, a lot of people they're county hunters or state hunters or whatever. So the object is to talk to everybody in every state, and then whenever you get that done, you talk to somebody in every county, in every state. So there'll be some loosely populated county that it's really hard to get. So some guy's going to go to his mother-in-law's for Thanksgiving. So he loads up his radio and he goes down and he sets up in a farmhouse in Podunk, Texas, and talks to people. And there's some crazy, D-Expedition is another one.
Yeah, we did one at the club, I think it was 1990, over to Mentone.
Yeah.
Set it up, put Loving County on the air for the county hunters.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And, the whole county had one ham resident of the 92 people that were in the county. One of them was a ham, and he didn't get on the air, so we were able to do that. The other thing, I took that FT-817 up on top of Guadalupe Peak and set up an antenna. I had ground wire all over the top of the peak. People were trying to keep from stepping on it, and I said, it's fine. But I made one contact to Florida.
Oh, cool.
On 15 meters.
Wow.
Virtually two things happened. I was sitting on top of a giant rock, which is like a huge insulator, so I never could get a good ground. And the other, there was a big solar flare that had wiped out most of the communication. So it was, 5 watts trying to get out was tough.
That reminds me, another event is SOTA, Summits on the Air.
Yeah.
So people go to all the mountains everywhere. And then there's an islands too. So if it's and I forget all the standards, but some of the spoil islands around Corpus Christi are named, and so it counts.
Wow.
Okay.
But like Shamrock Island and a bunch of those are all nature preserves, but there's some out there. I remember us looking at them thinking, man, we could go out there and anchor off one of those and just sit on the beach, and while we're dying from loss of blood from mosquitoes, we could we could talk to people. But speaking of QRP, I brought this up. If you like to tinker, this is your hobby.
Oh yeah,
this is a complete radio station.
Radio in a box
that I made.
Radio in a jar.
And little battery pack, and I had to bring up my tiny little
panel
keyer. And this is the radio. I built it in one of those little. You see it?
That's pretty nifty. Yeah. For those of you watching on the video side,
it's
very
tiny. It's
very cute.
Yeah, it's a little larger than a pack of cigarettes, and it's. I probably should have labeled all this. I always forget what's what, but it has a little antenna jack, and I've got a chunk of antenna and some paracord and stuff in there to put it up. And what's really cool on these simple radios, and this is a kit. I did not design this myself.
Oh, okay.
But what's really cool about it, you have to solder it and do all that stuff. But if you ever just listened to the Morse bands without the signal, without any kind of filters, without signal rejection or anything, it's amazing what you hear.
Yeah.
From all over the world.
I bet.
So
what's the ERP on that when it transmits?
I have to look it up. I think it's a half a watt.
Okay.
Yeah. And I've talked to people all over. And the biggest problem, if you're in Morse, if you're not experienced with it, it's easier to send than it is to receive. Mm-hmm. And so you'll send, and you'll have some guy that can send it, 30 words per minute that doesn't slow down for you. There's no telling how many I've missed. But every once in a while, if somebody, okay, this guy's an idiot, I'll go really slow for him, and I'll get to talk to him. So
when I was at my height of CW skill, when I was working with a silent key and also a guy who not only was a great mentor to me in ham radio, but he was a brother Mason, one of the guys who got me interested in becoming a Freemason, a guy named Wayne Redden. He would always tell me, as you get faster and faster with Morse code, you can key faster and understand faster. Don't use that as an ego thing or a show-off thing. He said, if somebody is, remember where you were when you can only key 5 words a minute, and if you hear somebody out there at 5 or 7 words a minute and they need somebody to talk to, whatever they are sending out at, that's what you send back to them, because that's where they're comfortable. They're sending a message. They're not necessarily saying, I could always key way faster than I could read. Everybody can do that if you're into it. But But he was always like, you just be mindful of how fast they're keying and key at that speed, because they're telling you without telling you, this is as fast as I can read it back. And so, yeah, it's aggravating to hear somebody out there who's, you can tell they're trying to either learn CW or hone their skills, and somebody just comes firing back at them.
They, and the way it's segmented unofficially in the bands, there are frequencies for fast and frequencies for slow, and also the ARRL, Amateur Radio Relay League, they do broadcasts and in code, and they'll transmit like an article out of their magazine at different speeds, and you can practice copying, because hearing it is the whole thing. And when you look at Morse code, if anybody's ever interested in learning it, when you look at it and you're like me and you're visual, I'm visual with everything, music, all that. I'm extremely visual. I typically see the patterns before I hear them. When you learn to hear the patterns in Morse code, that's when you're on it. When you ignore, where you don't have to go.
That's the trick. You don't need to hear dotted and try to think of a dash and a dot and a dash and a dot. You just have to hear dotted and know, hey man, that's C.
Yep.
And so it's very much in its own way sort of like music.
Exactly.
It is.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
Very much so. But once you get there, you can figure it out, and you can find somebody that'll do 5 words a minute with you all day long, because there's a lot of interest among the old guys. Oh, by the way, your Sea Daddy is like an older guy, like in the Coast Guard, Navy, an old guy that helps you out.
Uh-huh.
Kind of hooks you up. You get the good stuff, good jobs, because this certain guy likes you and thinks you're a cool guy. That's your Sea Daddy. In ham radio, he's called an Elmer.
Yeah, your Elmer.
That's your Elmer.
Yeah,
So Wayne was one of my Elmers too.
Yeah.
Wayne Redden.
Both of our Elmers. That is true. Yeah.
He got me into it, and like I said, I went through a period of code, and it's one of those things. I did it, and it's kind of like, okay, I did it, but I also, very honestly, when I was doing ham radio, I was doing a lot of other things at the time. I was very busy with work. I was at the sheriff's office, and I was a sergeant, and I was SWAT commander. I was playing in music, playing bands when I could, and we had a lot of stuff going on, a lot of adventure. And that was something I would do when there was nothing else to do, and I stayed sharp on it, and I put it away, sort of, thinking one of these days I'm going to need that. Like, I'm not going to be able to do other things.
You'll find it's a skill like bike riding. It'll come right back.
It comes back. You are exactly right, Bill.
And the speed will come right back too. It takes a little practice, a little time, but it will.
Yeah. And I think that it's valuable, maybe not as valuable as it used to be as a mode of communication, but that's a valuable thing for your mind to know how to do. It is a great exercise for the mind.
When I look back on a lot of the things I've done in astronomy and ham radio and all, there were times that I needed that. Mm-hmm. I needed to immerse in something that doesn't involve anybody else, just because I don't want to disappoint or have to wait on somebody else to show up. And I needed to immerse and get away from something. That's why. Mm. So now here I am with a lot of downtime, and I got all the gear. It's a flip of the switch, and I'm on the air, so it's great. And I've put away a lot of pastimes for that, and I'm bringing them out because they're now within my window. I'm in
a pastime renaissance right now.
Oh, cool.
I'm getting all of my ham radio stuff back out, studying for a test, go back into rocketry.
In rockets
I
again.
got a garage full of rockets I'm working on right now, so I'm going back to the things that 10, 15 years ago the only reason I ever let go of them and didn't do them as often is because I got busy with other things.
Exactly.
And now I'm kind of at a point where a lot of that stuff I figured out that I was dealing with, a lot of it was just a lot of noise. Now that I don't have it in my life, I'm actually like, you know what? I can go back. I can get back into rockets again. I can actually pull out my ham stuff and start doing ham radio again. And it's very liberating. It's like a relief.
Yep.
Being able to get back to the things that you were especially in your late teens and early 20s, you were very interested in it.
Well, and there's a period when you do stuff like that because somebody gives you a radio and an antenna and you're young and broke. A lot of guys get started that way. Here you go, kid. Mm-hmm. And so you do that. And then later on in life, you have money and you can travel and your job's busy. And so, we would take off. And
one of the guys has a philosophy that keeps him active. It's W5WRL Bill. Make one contact a day. It's Bill Lawless.
Yeah. It's a good philosophy.
A Morse guy told me that, yeah.
One contact a day, and that will keep you active.
It will. I look back at when I did that. I look over my logs, and you tell when I dropped out. I stopped. Mm-hmm. And then you're kind of nervous about getting back on the air. And then you remember at the peak of your game when you were talking to a nervous new guy. And one thing I'll say about ham radio in general, it is very forgiving to new people and accepting.
Yes.
In most cases.
You'll have a
there
few.
There is some effery going on right now. Bill and I touched on it before we started the cameras about the digital modes.
Yeah.
Because it has turned into a texting on the air. But... And tell me your thoughts and the meme and all that stuff. Kind of give us a rundown.
It's actually been happening in ham radio since the beginning. When they first started with Spark Gap, Morse code.
Right.
But then they came out with a regular Morse code, and those guys that started with the Spark Gap didn't like that. And then when it evolved into AM broadcast type, where they used AM modulation, those guys didn't like the code. And then when single sideband came around, the AMers didn't like that. And now the single sideband people and all the digital, it never ends.
So there's always been those damn kids thing going on, right? Yeah.
But that's what enhances and keeps the hobby going.
Right.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's important to have, I mean, you can still do anything you want to that you've always been able to do in ham radio. You can still do phone, you can still do CDO, you can still straight key or whatever. And so it's important to do things and keep technologies within the hobby that are going to keep younger generations interested in it.
One of the things I followed kind of from early on is PSK 31.
Yeah.
And PSK it's a digital mode, and for non-ham people, what it is, I hook up my radio and I plug my computer in it, and Bill does the same, and there's nothing in between us. There's no internet, no nothing, and it's like a chat window, and we're typing messages, and you can have conversations. You can talk to people back and forth.
See, I did all that. PSK built the software or the hardware to make the software work.
Yeah, your interface.
To the radio, all that, built it all, got it up, made a contact to a fella in Indiana, unplugged it, turned it off.
Done.
I've never messed with it since. To me, the thrill and the enjoyment was making it work.
Yeah.
That's very well said.
Point. And then once I'd done it, I'd done it.
Mm-hmm.
Very well said.
But I've done that with a lot of things: slow scan, TV, RIDI, packet, M-Tor, PAC-Tor, all of those modes way back there. Now they're coming out with the new ones. And another thing I was going to think about with ham radio that crosses into my caving hobby, there are people that do that, low frequency. And what's cool about, you can get on 80 meters in the cave, you don't have to have a license, because your signal never gets out into the ionosphere.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I never thought about that.
It's kind of like flying a drone indoors. You don't need a drone pilot's license.
Makes sense, yeah.
And there's been some cavers use that and actually make very good, reliable communications using it.
That's pretty cool.
The first starts of it was very, very small text or Morse code, and then it's morphed into full-blown voice now.
You reminded me of a story. There's a mode called Hellschreiber, because the guy who invented it, his last name was Hell, and
which means bright in German.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to ask what that meant, but anyway, he was a German guy that did it, and it is a mode that was in the telegraph in the wire days.
Did you say Schreiber?
Hellschreiber, yeah.
So
Rider.
Bright Rider.
Right, Rider. Mm-hmm. It was his name, not.
I got you.
Yeah.
But maybe a play on words in German.
It could be, yeah. And anyway, it puked out text on a little strip of paper. And what was really cool about it, the way it worked, and it was done on a drum, is the message comes out kind of at an angle. I don't know how, I'm not explaining this well. Sort of like if you look at a candy cane from the side, how the stripes are diagonal.
Helical?
Yeah, helical. Thank you very much. It would punch helical holes in it, but it was a message. And right where it ran off, hey, Matt, it's Tim. I'm going to the brewery later today. So, anyway, Hellscriber, somebody wrote into some ham software Hellscribers. So instead of paper, it's printing it on the screen, but it looks like that
they
paper.
made it. They stayed true to what it looks like.
So I was reading different days. So different, like in a year's time, there's sort of a ham radio liturgy like the Catholic Church and the patterns of the teachings. That on this day is this meetup. This day is when the slow code people get on. This day is this mode. Well, there was a Hellscriber, and I thought, what the hell is this? Get it? See, I did it. And I looked it up, and I had some software, some free software that ran it. And so I screwed around with it, and I thought, what the hell? And I sent out a CQ, and this guy answered me first rattle out of the box.
Wow.
I don't know if I'm doing this right. It's my first time. And he answered me back, yeah, me too, man. I just read this article. And so two guys just bored, and so I think I managed to save the whole conversation. So they have that. And you run into stuff like that all the time. What I want to talk about is FT8. FT8 is a new mode. And it's what's very magic about it. This is the one I was saying gives only enough information back and forth to confirm a call. Okay, so if I called up Tim and he's in some interesting country and I want to log it for an award or whatever, we'll talk about awards. If we don't get that information, if we don't swap call signs, if we don't swap locations and signal reports, you can't claim it.
It doesn't count.
Right, you can't claim it at all. And you have to mutually confirm it by sending cards, or you can do it online.
Well, the other cool part about that mode, like all digital modes, they will continue to work long after you can't hear it on the receiver.
Yeah,
they will continue to talk, and that's amazing.
What's incredible about it? It's a sound. If you're not a ham radio person, you've got a shortwave type radio. Tune it to 14.074 or 5. And you will hear this random music sounding tone. And it's like a little kid just poking on a little synthesizer. And it works through horrible conditions. And like Bill said, there are nights you'll have it on or days and you don't hear anything, but it's decoding signals. So anyway, why is this fascinating? It works low power. It works in horrible, shitty conditions. But here's the other thing. Now, we're getting into the internet, and two things I like about it. In any other day, and I still do this, just like you said in the 90s, because it's fun to operate with no computers, like no cell phone.
That's my favorite thing.
Because right now, the way it is today, if I called and I'm a new guy and I hear N5 POB on a local repeater, or we're just talking, and I'm like, okay, what's your name? And we have to actually interact. Nowadays, I can just go there and look it up. Oh, that's Bill Bentley. Yeah, there's a picture of him too, with his dog, and there's his truck and his antenna. It's like a Facebook kind of thing. While I still do that, you would have to get on the air and work for a while to know what the conditions are, to see. You have to listen to other conversations. Okay, there's France talking to Canada. There's Venezuela talking to California. Okay.
Kind of helps you figure out the propagation.
Yeah, this might be a good night, and I really want to talk to my radio buddy in Colombia. That was in the day. Now on FT8, you pull up a map.
Yeah.
And I turn on my radio, and I send out a CQ, and I have a conversation with somebody.
And you get all these.
And it shows everybody that hears you, because this is all automated. Mm-hmm. My software is listening to my radio and plotting everyone it hears, showing who's talking to whom across the world, and it shows the pattern that your radio is working. And then you'll see that second bounce. It hits the ionosphere, troposphere, whatever layer you're hitting that night. bounces down, bounces up again, and you'll see it. And so pretty soon you're talking to New Zealand or something, and it tells you if like if I just want to know if Tim's working, I want to talk to Tim, it'll beep or even text me if I set it up right to say, hey, Tim's on the air. You know, I could text him, but screw that. I'm going to run in the next room and talk to him. The argument is that that's not ham radio. And I understand that viewpoint. And there is, dude, half of me is, oh, you damn kids, you're screwing it up. You're supposed to build your own radio out of wood and dog fur. Yeah. There's part of that in me. Mm-hmm. But then when I get on Reddit, where it's mostly young geek men on that, and they're doing FT8 and they're doing the stuff I don't even understand yet, the Arduinos and all those.
I don't get that either.
I don't either, and I'm afraid to because
I'm
a friend
glad to
told me
hear
never
that.
to do that.
Yeah,
because I don't either.
But when I see that, I'm going, well, that's our future, and those guys one day are going to be. They're going to go, man. You know what? Grandpa left me this groovy old key. I'm gonna learn that. So it. In a way, it's our future. In a way, it's just kind of you're an appliance operator, and there are nights that I've gotten off of that and just picked up, and I'm like, get on the radio, hey, somebody please talk to me, and I wind up talking to some guy in Oklahoma, and just and you'll get into conversations with people you don't know, and there's one guy was a cop and a bass player, same as me. Mm-hmm. With his badass station. He's one of those, I forget what you call spread array or something. He lived on a big chunk of property, and he had telephone poles put in, and he strung a wire, like they had these big array antennas.
Oh, yeah.
So
that's
rhombic?
Rhombic,
thank you. Yeah,
that's
and
it.
there's another one. Anyway, he was doing all that stuff. And that's fascinating in and of itself, and just to kind of talk and make friends and kind of get your geek on,
Yeah. For me, that's always been a big part of it. One of the reasons I've always liked doing it without computer. I did a little packet back in the day, but one of the reasons I always liked, just keying, CW or phone was just simply because it keeps the humanity in ham radio. And I'm for all the digital modes. I don't have a negative criticism about any of them. I may not be interested in certain ones and more interested in other ones, but I think it's important that we keep the actual humanity in ham radio, because if you think about it, some of the greatest things ham radio do, nobody cares about ham radio anymore. Nobody talks about ham radio outside of the ham radio world until something happens like Hurricane Dorian or some sort of a natural disaster. Who are the first guys who you can depend on when things are still real fluid and things are not organized yet from a government standpoint? Those ham radio operators are right there, and they're ready to communicate and help people get stuff done.
Yeah.
So,
And they can get on without an infrastructure.
Exactly.
Yep. Like the internet and the cell phones require.
Yeah, if you got a radio and a generator.
Always reliable.
Exactly.
There's something in it for everyone. And we can't cover it all in an hour podcast episode, but it's if you like vintage gear, look here, guys, Vibraplex. Lightning bug.
That is pretty darn cool.
Right, mechanical keyer, into the newer benchers, and
I wish the
and
viewers on the video side could see how that works.
And watch one of the old time CW operators operate at 35, 40 words a minute, like Roger Rose, W5LXS. It's a pleasure to watch. Mm-hmm. He makes it look simple.
This one uses circuitry in the radio. It's just two switches. And this one is an actual mechanical.
Mm-hmm. And this is old-fashioned break and make contact.
Uh-huh.
That's so cool. Yeah, mine, a guy showed me the little one I pulled out earlier, the miniature version. I've got a strap that I strap it to my thigh, so I can sit down and work it. Mm-hmm. But vintage, there's a lot of vintage radio guys, and I'll tell you one thing that's crazy. You can find them on YouTube. These dudes build, in the infancy, the early days of the hobby, back, I guess, Victorian into the early 1900s and all. And these guys you had to build your radio if you wanted one. Mm-hmm. And these things were death traps.
Oh yeah,
nailed to a 2x4. Yeah. I started seeing some.
There was two radios. You had a receiver and a transmitter.
Right.
Like and the old Heath kit and all those. And all those.
You had a make-break knife switch to switch between transmit and receive.
And the
so
plate,
it made you talk longer when you were talking or send in code, and then you'd go back to receive.
Yeah, and but the grid voltages on those things, the plate voltages were just electric chair country, man. It was like an Ampeg, like a bass amp. And they were talking about it, and they showed it. It was one that was literally built on a 2x4 with tubes and a few things, and they were explaining it, and then they started getting into numbers and like, be careful with this because. And these guys had them up either like really high where kids, dogs or cats couldn't get on. And they put cages around because some were just death traps. Yep. And the antennas were huge and heavy, big weird things. And then, of course, it all got smaller. And then now it's getting Chinesey. They're getting some cheap crap in there that's not great. But
some of it's pretty good though. So I mean, it just depends on what you're going for and what you want. There's an HF rig out right now that has mostly Chinese parts in it that everybody's just raving about.
Yeah.
So, the little cheap Bofang. They're all been ruled as of this week illegal. Everybody.
Really?
Oh, yes. That's a done
I
deal.
wondered how that was going to go.
It came out, and you will see a fire sale between now and September 30th when the law comes into effect, because there are going to be people trying to get rid of them right and left.
So for everybody who to kind of bring everybody up to speed on this, there's a few 4 or 5 major manufacturers of ham radio gear. There's ICOM, Kenwood, Yaesu,
Timtech, MFJ.
The KX5, the Electcraft, and some others and some kits and stuff. So there's not a lot. And a handheld radio, I don't know, anywhere from couple $100 up for a good one, and then this Chinese company, Baofeng, whatever it is, came out and they're selling it for like $30,
$35.
Yeah, and a lot of people are buying these things. The problem is, they do receive and transmit, but they are not the frequencies are not very well controlled.
They're not type accepted for operation.
Yeah.
Plus, the biggest problem they had is they'll operate in the business band, the public service band, and the ham band and the aircraft band. And, as long as you use them in the ham band, you're legal. You can use them. Yeah. It's just illegal to sell them now.
And also some of those, just for instance, I could hit the button and talk to one of you guys here locally completely lawfully, and it would spur. It would transmit a spurious emission because it's not very well controlled. Mm-hmm. It would transmit a spur that could interfere with police or somebody else.
Or for air traffic control, right?
Yeah. There's all kinds of junk like that. So
that's typical. I mean, and that's typical of lower end Chinese stuff that it would do something like that.
That's how it is. And a friend of mine gave me one, and he's an Arduino guy, Jim. Yeah. He is super smart, and you can do anything with one of those. I'm just terrified of them. So. But if you're going to get started, used gear is great. The nice thing about the industry is I've used 30-year-old radios without a second. The one up at the observatory is very old, and it was given to me from an SK Silent Key, a radio operator that passed away. Yeah, my
HF rig's about 35 years old now. Yeah,
and you can get simple, you can get complex. My problem, not just with the disease and treatment. I have a hard time remembering how to use things with menus and all that. Now, it's bad enough.
Just keep the manual beside
when you're the cheat manuals. Those things are fantastic. They have these books that are written by much smarter people than me that if I have a problem like I don't know, I need to save a frequency, whatever. And it's got a little flip chart, flipboard. Okay, here it is right here. Press this button, this button, this button. You don't have to go through the manual and do the whole thing. Very quick, cheat manuals. And then whatever I do regularly, I have to write it down and remember it. And so there's that. That's one thing about the nicer, more complex gear like the Yaesu. And it's not a hard hobby to get into, but you need to be... You need to be somebody willing to do a little online research or hang out with a buddy to do it, and then pick out what you want to do. So let's go through it. I was trying to figure this out. We have contesting, which are people that make the largest number of contacts, that they can in a given time for a certain contest, right? And you hear those guys.
Worked all states, worked all countries, worked all counties.
Now those awards chasing. Those guys, when you hear those guys, there's CQ contest, and you'll call them N5 MAV 01, blah, 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 blah. And it's 10 seconds, you're going, what the hell just happened? I thought I was just going to, and those guys, I mean, and if you look at the gear that they shop for, it's headsets and like little pedal push to talks and all this stuff that goes super fast. And they like that. This
weekend is the Texas QSO party, so
that's a good one. Yeah,
we're running a special event fighting that as well. So busy.
QSO parties are where a certain state, they try to call all the ham radio operators out just to get on the air. I guess for lack of a better word. And so, like if you're trying to hunt of the states, different organizations give awards, ARRL and some others. And there's some other international ones. You get a little certificate for worked all states and all this stuff, whatever you want to do. Well, it's hard to bag Delaware and North Dakota. Man, those are the unicorns because there's like 2 people that run radios in them. So when they have that QSO party, those guys dust off their gear and you can get on the air and talk to them. And
I think coming up, it may be past, but coming up is the Route 66 contest, and that's always fun. You try to work all the major towns where they have radio stations set up. Yeah, along the old Route 66 route.
That's a pretty neat way to do it. So you got all the modes, digital, and all, and you have those contests. You have special event stations, and then they have the QRP contest for the low power people. With little rigs like mine, see how far you can talk, and those things are more about the tenacity. You stay if you're just going to get online and talk to your cousin in New Hampshire. Low power isn't for you. It's not going to do it. You need to have the big amps and all that stuff. And whenever you hit the key, it dims all the lights in the house.
But you said a while ago, there's something in it for everyone. Yeah. You may have one guy that only gets on, up at 2350 gigahertz, and he works point to point with his buddy. You've got another guy that works only slow scan TV on the HF. You got somebody else that only does Morse code. Got other people just do voice on 20 meters to their buddies on the net. It just depends. If whatever's your niche and you want to do, it's out there.
Have you gotten cards from shortwave listeners?
I haven't, but I was long before I was a ham, I was a shortwave listener, and should have brought it. I've got a photo album full of cards from shortwave stations.
Yeah, there are still guys after that, and I get one every now and then. I heard you talk to N5POB the other night, and okay, I'll send them a card. It's and
truly makes their day when you send it.
Oh yeah, they love it. Yeah, and it's one thing that got me. I heard it over the horizon radar one day.
Oh, the old woodpecker.
Yeah, it sounded almost just like the Russian woodpecker. Mike Montalvo's doing an episode on the Russian woodpecker. We'll let him get to that. It was a Soviet Soviet radar system. In fact, it was near the Chernobyl nuclear power station that blew up and was powered by it, and kind of had something to do with why they quit using it. They couldn't generate enough power to use it anymore with that reactor down, all the other turmoil, staffing it and all, and satellite technology came out. But that's how the Reds watched for stuff coming over the horizon, missiles and such. And it sounds like a helicopter or a woodpecker. Mm-hmm. And people were hearing it in all their devices. I think it started in the 60s and ran up to
long time.
Up into the 80s.
It actually caused a lot of fear and trepidation with people because it was right about, it was not long after Sputnik and Russia had a space program, and people couldn't identify what it was, and it wasn't the U.S. It wasn't transmissions, from the U.S. and it had people worried.
A lot of those are back online now. They're using them. They're using that. And they're actually sounders. I found out you're hearing a sounder, which it's blowing out the signal to hear what comes back and then calibrating itself, so you probably won't hear it.
You ever heard of the number stations?
That was what I was going to get to next. The number stations are still out there. Yeah. And I can't think of, you'll have to Google it, but there's a...
I don't know their purpose myself.
Well, okay, I can answer that for the most part, but there's a website, I'll get to it later. If you Google, you'll find it, that tracks all the number stations and what they think they are. But most number stations are communications with spies in other countries. Yeah. That's done through, and they explain the single-use pad and how it works. They tells them what to do and what's going on. There's got to be a better way to do it, but they're still running number stations. And a lot of the theories are that they're being kept in place in the event that if shit goes down with we get in a big fight with Russia again, there could be a lot done by the government to
without the
internet connections between the two countries. There's a lot of control there, but the number stations will still work because air's free and you can't stop it, and it worked fine in the 60s.
Exactly right.
If you haven't seen Bridge of Spies, it was kind of a number station situation. The movie Number Stations is just totally it's a fun movie, but it's not what it was. They explain what each one of them are, and they talk about some of the weird ones. There's some very strange number stations out there. So
yeah, it's one of the reasons that it's sort of a ancient redundancy. In aviation, it's kind of the same thing. Where we still have all the VORs and still use the old school radio VORs, simply because if we ever don't have access to GPS,
and it works,
we have a fail-safe. Not a fail-safe, but we have a.
It's amazing how many people don't know how to use those.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
I always tell them, sometimes the old ways are still the best.
Oh yeah,
they
definitely.
work. And in the case of ham radio, the funnest.
Yeah, and you can waste a lot of, and the thing about it doesn't have to be expensive. A lot of the stuff is out there cheap or free, and you can get a decent radio for a couple $100 used, and you can spend more. I think the lower end ICOMs, Kenwoods, and all are still around $450, something like that. And you can do a lot of cool stuff with those.
Yeah.
But
you can get into it. If you want to dump down one big chunk of change, you can get a really good HF rig that actually is HF and UHF and VHF all in one.
That's all the different frequencies you could talk to your buddy, like on a CB radio, and then you can talk around the world, with different stuff.
Yeah, I went from eight HF rigs down to 4.
There you go.
4 now.
Yeah,
I have my main one at 100 watt Yaesu that's on my desk, and I have the little 5 watt and this little toy one. I've got a tiny little handheld. The other thing I was going to mention, it's fun to listen for, are pirate stations. There's still a bunch of them. There's a lot of shortwave pirate stations.
Oh yeah,
they're everywhere, and there's some different websites that track them and stay on it. And just to listen to the old farts. And what's crazy are the trash channels. I don't know if you guys listen to those. 14.313, and there's some others.
Matt and I listen to those at night when we're hunting down at the ranch. Yeah.
And what's funny about those, this is my working theory on it, that there's just normal guys like us that just want to get on the air at 1,500 watts and just ramble profanities and chew people out and all this stuff. But it got
ridiculous.
So bad. Yeah, it got so bad that, and you'll hear everything, racist, sexual stuff. It's bad. And it got so bad that FCC, they finally
cracked down on it.
Yeah, they got more serious about it, and then they got froze up for a while in the budget thing, and then they went right back to it. So it's insane. But put your scanner on 14.313 and just listen to it. You'll hear some colorful stuff. Make sure the kids aren't around.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's my deal. It's something you can really, if you're looking for something with immersion, with a lot to learn, but it's not so heavily technical that you're gonna, if you can run a modern video game, a PS4 or your Windows computer, or your my dad remote control, my great big dad controller, you can run a ham radio. It's a pretty simple device when you get down to it, and you learn a few things here and there, and anyone can do it. And then the club, strongly, anything you're doing, first things first. If you're going to get into a hobby, see if there's a local club.
Yeah,
and that's the best.
My dad had a philosophy, because he was a ham operator all of my life, and he said, you take care of your family, your community, and then ham radio always comes in last.
Yep.
And that's how it should be. And I try to teach that to the new hams. Sometimes they get the message, sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
Your family and your community shouldn't suffer because you want to do ham radio. That should be the very last thing. So it's a hobby.
Yeah. Evidently, one of the hobbies, one of the compartments that we've missed talking about is being a ham radio complete and total freak. moving into an HOA and putting up like a giant SETI-looking radar, dish and going,
dipoles all over.
what do you
your
mean this is
house
against
on the-
HOA rules? This is vital emergency communications, and then fighting with the HOA. And you're like, move out to a house in the country if you want to do that. If you want to just go crazy.
When I moved to the house I'm in now, before I even looked at the inside, I called the realtor and said, is there a tower restriction or HOA? Nope. I said, all right, now let's look at it.
Yeah.
And I've got a 60-foot tower in the back.
Yeah,
Or
I've driven by
66
there.
foot.
Yeah, you have an impressive antenna farm. Mine's very simple and hidden, but and not by design. It's just everywhere I can put an antenna, there's a tree around it. So it's you can't say like my UHF, VHF antennas. My smaller ones are up hidden by a tree. You just can't see them. We get really high windstorms. I have to like get it the right angle to even be able to see them to see if they're still up. So.
Most complicated I ever had mine was 2 poles, and with one I had a 10-meter, I had a fiberglass 10-meter antenna, and then I had a disc cone on the other one, and then off of the disc cone I ran a dipole.
Yeah.
And I could run 20 or 40 meters on that dipole.
If you ever want to have some fun, I put up a 10-meter beacon, which is a lot of fun. And there's a guy that sort of volunteer assigns frequencies. I mean, you don't have to, but he lets you know who's out and what, whose beacons are working and all. And that was cool because it's 5 watts and ran 24 hours a day, and I got hits from all over the world.
And you know what's crazy? The other day I was listening around on 10, and I hear a beacon off somewhere in Nevada or someplace, and nobody on voice. Now, if I'm hearing that beacon code, the propagation's open, but not a soul.
Yeah.
And that's sad.
And somebody told me that one day. I was like, man, it's just I guess my antenna's messing up. I can't get a hold of anybody. I can't. And the guy said, it's just that people aren't on the air.
Exactly.
And I can't remember why it was.
10 meters tough anyway for phone.
Well, there was a big event or contest. I can't for the life of me remember what it was, but there were a lot of people on the air. And the first thing I did was look at FT8, and it was just jam-packed with people. So I went over to phone and made a lot of contacts. And it's just if there were more people on the air, it would be
exactly.
Better. But there's just not, or they won't answer, or who the hell knows.
Have you ever worked 6-meter band?
I've played with it.
That's my favorite band when it's open.
Everybody says that,
one
yeah.
And one and one and one and one, and just one right after the other.
They're like 50 watts, and it's just they call it the magic band. When it's open, it's just all over. When we talk about a band being open, that means the conditions are right. The solar conditions, the temperature, what time of
atmospheric
day,
conditions.
We pick different frequencies to do different things, and 6-meter can be just absolutely magic. So
if you have a huge cold front coming down from the north, you get a signal and bounce right along that cold front all the way up.
Wow, I've never done that.
That's cool.
That's part of the magic of ham radio. I remember there was a time when if you wanted to get your kids interested in science and engineering and stuff like that, you got them into ham radio was one of the things. Rocketry was one of the other things.
Yeah.
And it was just a great way. You were talking about, it doesn't have to be too technical. That's true. But in ham radio, you can get as complicated as you want.
Yep.
When it comes to the engineering side of it, and a lot of guys who ended up being, especially electronics engineers or mechanical engineers, those guys all started out as kids in ham radio.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it has the same appeal. Like when we talked about computer bulletin boards in the 80s when I shot that episode with Jim Storms. Yeah. That one was really cool because it's 2:00 in the morning. During the summer, you're in your room by yourself, and you put all this crap together, and you solder and burn holes in the carpet and all that stuff, and you fire it up and talk to somebody, whether it's down the street or around the world, and it's really cool. I programmed in my 2-meter radio. It's good for local stuff, and I put in Simplex and some other channels around it. So these are just frequencies people would use just to bullshit with each other. And you'll catch just friends talking quite a bit. Just a couple of guys just BSing and they could be texting, they could be on the phone, and They're not. There's a guy that sits out in his shop, smokes cigarettes, and talks to people on the radio, through radio repeaters and just direct. And a guy in Big Spring, I forgot his name. He's out almost every night. I would hear.
Paul.
I think so. It's been a while. And if I would just go in there and reconfigure how my power is set up, and leave my 2 meter on, it is right now the way it's set up. If my power supply is on, everything's on or everything's off, and I need to get in there and set it up to where I just listen to that 2 meter more often.
Well, I you've heard of APRS for packet. I took a TNC and programmed it through my computer to spit out a beacon every, I think it's a minute and 55 seconds, my home location QTH. It's N5POB-1. If that thing ever lost its memory, I'd have to go back to school to learn how to reprogram.
Oh, yeah.
But it's been running continuously since, I think, 2002.
Wow.
It's just constant. And it's an old commercial Motorola rig, programmed both frequencies for the APRS 2 meter frequency, and just left it so if it ever gets pushed from channel 1 or 2, it's still on the same.
That's pretty cool.
And it just sits there and runs and runs.
That's a heck of a set of finals you got in that radio that have lasted going on 20 years.
And it's on the little tower on a single antenna on it, Cushcraft.
I think
sitting there.
My beacon ran close to 4 or 5 years on a Radio Shack, old Radio Shack 10 meter. And it started getting kind of funky, and I had it cleaned up a little bit, but the finals and all are still good. I just need to put up another antenna. I don't need another antenna. And a beacon is a pain in the ass because, especially if you live in a house, because you got to shut it off when you're going to do anything else, and you got to remember to turn it back on. And I had mine on a little key fob deal because it was in a different part back in the shop, so I could turn it off when I would get on the air and turn it back on. And one nice thing about low power is you don't piss your neighbors off. Under that 100 watts, but you can still hear.
One of the greatest things that ever happened for ham radio is cable television.
Yeah,
because
that's
they
true.
got rid of the outside antennas, and then the frequency shifts of channels is all now. It's extremely rare to get a ham interfering with somebody's TV. Yeah, extremely rare.
The only problem I ever had running over 100 watts was with my next door neighbor, guy who used to live right next door to me, a guy named John Alvarez, who since long ago he moved off to San Antonio. But houses in my neighborhood are pretty close to one another, and I was running about 150 watts on 10 meters, and he called me. I had been on pretty late one night, and he called me the next day, and he said, "Do you have some kind of a radio or something at your house?" And he said, "I saw some things that look like antennas over between our houses." And I was like, "Yeah, I've got some ham radios in my studio room." And I was talking last night. He said, "Well, it's not causing any problems with anything except," and this is about 1999. You remember wireless phones?
Yeah.
He said, "We can't talk on the phone when you're on your ham radios." And I said, "Okay, well, let's figure out what we can do to make sure I don't do that anymore." So the first thing I did was I went down below 100 watts. And I was using a 150 watt inline amplifier, which was probably too much anyway. And then the other thing was that at the time there was some shielding that you could buy that would go between the electronic device and where it plugs into the wall. And I bought him some of those, and between us doing those two things, it corrected the problem. But that's one thing that's very important, especially for new hams to understand, is that you don't have the right to do that. You don't have the right to mess with somebody else's.
Actually, you do.
Well, you have the technical right.
Under the law, and if you look at all those devices, like the touch lamps and all that, is a little thing that says this device must receive interference and must accept interference. It's written in them.
What amazes me about the whole thing is I'm always conscious of it. I talk to my neighbors.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Good diplomacy.
It's
speakers.
More about being a good neighbor.
Yeah. Now, I was in a band that was meeting up for rehearsal, and the studio's right next to my ham radio thing, and I was waiting for these guys to show up, and I was doing PSK 31, which really rattles electronics bad. Like it something about that mode, because it's full duty cycle. You can really hear it in headphones and stuff. It was when I was in the Corey Yeager band, and Corey came in, and we had our headsets on, and I transmitted, and I saw him kind of jump, and he starts tweaking knobs.
So Matt did it again.
Yeah. So I it stopped, and I set it onto the test signal, just send a carrier to test, and he would get it working, and I would pop it again. We went through this for a while till everybody got there, but that's the only time I have intentionally interfered with it. But everybody's cool, but it's amazing to go on ham radio social media sites and forums and such and see the crap that people have dealt with. And I mean, where they've been nice to people and said, hey, your $20 Kmart baby monitor is destroying 6 meter. Mm-hmm. And we've gone in as a radio community and bought you this really high-end set, and if you would kindly throw your other ones, and they're like, F you, and slam the door.
Yeah.
And it's gotten so bad they've had to have FCC come and they're trying to say, guys, you don't understand.
I've dealt with that. With fence chargers.
We hear all of your conversations. We hear everything that's going on in your house on 6 meter. Mm-hmm. And not only can we not use 6 meter, we hear you guys bumping uglies. So really, here's this one, and they slam the door in their face, and they wound up getting FCC out. It's crazy to reach. One of my favorite stories. Mm-hmm. A guy, he put up an antenna in an apartment, like one of the bug catcher antennas. It's a very obviously a ham radio antenna that he clamps to his balcony, like on an apartment in New York or something. And he said he hadn't even plugged it in yet. So he hadn't even gotten his radio yet. And this lady started complaining, just going ape shit, complaining. And he said there was, that's right. He said there wasn't even a cable on it. And she said, she told the apartment manager, I knew it was him because I could see his picture on the TV. Like it would go static and I could see a picture of him. Like you could sit down and try to explain to somebody like that. That's not how it works.
Right.
But you're not going to.
Nah, you're not going to get through to somebody like that.
You're not going to.
You're talking about stories. I'll tell you one I did. We had a family reunion at home, and the house was full of people. So I went over to my mom's organ, to the high-pitched key, and I wasn't a ham, but I could send CQ really fast. I'd heard it all my life. Yeah. I start sending CQ, and my dad's talking to my uncle, and he goes, oh, I left my radio on. And he went back into his radio room. He come out scratching his head. He goes, I know I heard something.
Well, that's how.
But he heard that over all the talking.
Yeah, you're
he was honed in. Yeah.
We were watching Downton Abbey the other night, and there's in the very first episode opens with Morse code. I forgot what it was, but I left my radio on, and I was scanning different. I don't remember what I was scanning for, but it was in the 20 meter band, and I had been watching a video about the Russian woodpecker. And left the radio running, watched a movie with my wife, and I got up and I walked back there to the bathroom, and I heard it, and I thought I'd left the damn video running, and it was an over-the-horizon radar that sounded just like the Russian woodpecker, and I got out my phone and was going to record it, and it quit, but I did get a recording of it. I'll put a link of it up of some of those. And I'll tell you my own interference story. This room is vented for cigars, so guys can come in and smoke cigars. It sucks the smoke out, and then it has a carbon filter that cleans the air, and then it has an ozone scrubber. So it takes a couple of days, but you can't tell a cigar's ever been smoked in here. And I was getting the weirdest interference.
Coming off one of those filters.
Very, very strange interference. And I've got pictures of it, and I was asking other people what it was. So finally, I just had enough of it. It was getting in my way, and I went out, and I threw the master breaker on my house, shut everything off for a few seconds, and turned it back on, and it went away. And I remembered that ozone scrubber, if it loses power, does not come back on. You have to go hit the switch. So that immediately I started, figuring out which devices did that. So,
doorbell transformers.
Electric
blankets, fish aquarium heaters, anything that's just sitting there making a low connection start arcing.
Yep.
big time interference, and it's broadband from one end of the spectrum to the other.
Halogen cabinet lights, I remember, were a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
Fluorescent lights.
Yeah, fluorescent lights too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Those things. Back in the recording studio, those were. So I'm LED on everything now because those are just awful, and they'll make guitar amps just scream.
Mm-hmm.
Old ones. So. Guys, we're up against an hour. Enjoyed it, and
Good times as always.
We'll come back to this one, man. This is a lot of fun. You know what? We ought to get on the air while we're doing this podcast sometime. I was that far from doing it, and then I'm like,
I was gonna ask if there was a way we could hook one of the keyers up to the mixing console.
Yeah.
But it would have probably required a little bit of wiring to do
that.
So.
And I have a practice rig we can set up and do that. So
that'd be fun.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, enjoyed it?
Well, 73s and catch you down the band.
7-3,
right.
yeah. I'll let y'all Google that. 7-3. Enjoyed it, folks. Thanks, guys.
Night. Cheers.